The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, though it didn't feel like I had slept at all. The first thing I became aware of was the quiet in my apartment. Soft morning light slipped through the thin curtains, painting pale gold lines across the walls. Everything looked exactly the same as it had the day before. My couch, my coffee table, the stack of patient files I had left on the desk. Normal, safe. Nothing like the mansion I had left only a few hours ago. And yet my mind refused to stay here. It kept drifting back there, to the red room, to Diego Navarro. I rolled onto my back and stared at the ceiling, letting out a slow breath as the memory replayed itself whether I wanted it to or not. The crimson walls, the way he had stood so calmly behind me, the intensity in his voice when he said I had broken the only rule in his house, and then the kiss. My eyes closed briefly. What kind of therapist let something like that happen during the first session? The question had circled my thoughts all night like a stubborn echo. I sat up in bed, rubbing a hand over my face before swinging my legs over the side. The wooden floor felt cool under my feet as I walked toward the kitchen. I needed coffee, strong coffee, the kind that forced your brain to start behaving rationally again, because rational thinking was exactly what I needed right now. By the time the coffee machine finished brewing, I had already started constructing the professional speech I would give him. Last night was a mistake. Boundaries were crossed. If this therapy is going to continue, certain lines cannot be blurred again. It sounded perfect in my head. Clean, professional, responsible. I poured the coffee into a mug and leaned lightly against the counter. The problem was, I wasn't entirely sure I believed my own speech. My mind drifted again to the moment in the red room when Diego admitted why he built it. The quiet honesty in his voice had been unexpected. A man like him wasn't supposed to show vulnerability, yet for a moment he had. And I had seen it. Worse, I had understood it. I lifted the mug to my lips, taking a slow sip, hoping the bitterness would clear the confusion in my head. Instead, it made another thought surface. Was I actually planning to go back? The question hung in the quiet kitchen like something fragile. Part of me knew the professional answer. Of course I should go back. Therapists don't abandon clients after one complicated session, especially not when the client clearly needed help navigating emotions he had buried for years. But another part of me understood the risk. Diego Navarro wasn't just another patient sitting in a quiet office chair. He was a man who commanded an empire, a man whose name carried weight in places most people never wanted to see. And somehow, in less than one evening, I had stepped directly into the center of his world. My phone buzzed suddenly on the kitchen counter, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced down at the screen. Unknown number. For a moment, I simply stared at it, a strange feeling settling in my chest. Then I answered, "Hello?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then I heard a familiar voice. "Good morning, Dr. Ruby, Diego." His tone was calm, composed, as if the night before had been nothing more than an ordinary conversation. "I hope you slept well," he continued. Something in the quiet confidence of his voice made my heart beat just a little faster, because somehow I already knew what he was going to say next. "The session," Diego Navarro said smoothly, "is not finished." I didn't respond immediately. For a moment, all I could hear was the quiet hum of my kitchen and the faint sound of my own breathing. Then I straightened slightly, forcing my voice into something steady, professional. "Mr. Navarro," I said, keeping my tone even, "last night blurred several boundaries. If we are to continue any form of professional relationship, those boundaries need to be clearly reestablished." There was silence on the other end, not awkward, not uncertain, but controlled, as if he was taking his time, not because he needed to think, but because he enjoyed the pause. "I expected that answer," Diego finally said. His voice was softer now, measured, almost thoughtful. "But tell me, doctor," he continued, If it was only a mistake, why haven't you hung up yet? My grip tightened slightly around the mug. I hadn't even realized it. A small, irritating flicker of awareness moved through me. I haven't hung up, I replied, because I take my work seriously. A quiet exhale came from the other end of the line. Not quite a laugh, but close enough to feel like one. Of course you do. There was something about the way he said it that made it sound like more than just an observation, like he was studying me, dissecting every word. You saw something last night, Diego added calmly. Something I don't show people. My chest tightened just slightly. That's exactly why we need to maintain structure, I said quickly. Emotional exposure without boundaries can create attachment, he cut in. The word landed too precisely, too accurately. I went quiet, and that silence said more than I wanted it to. Diego didn't rush to fill it. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped just enough to feel closer, more personal. You're thinking about the room. It wasn't a question. I stared at the counter in front of me, my reflection faintly visible in the polished surface. No, I said, another pause. Then quietly, you're lying. My jaw tightened. I am not. The walls, Pod, he continued, ignoring me completely. The lighting, the way your body reacted when you realized you weren't in control of the space anymore. My breath caught before I could stop it, and he heard it. Of course he did. That's what unsettled you, Diego said. Not me. My fingers curled slightly against the edge of the counter. You don't get to decide what unsettles me, I said, sharper this time. A beat passed. Then, no, he agreed, but I get to observe it. Something about the calm certainty in his voice made it difficult to argue, because the worst part was, he wasn't entirely wrong. I pushed myself upright, forcing distance into my tone again. If this session is going to continue, I said, it will be in a controlled environment. My office, neutral space, clear boundaries. This time the silence stretched longer. He was considering it or pretending to. I don't do neutral, Diego said finally, simple and final. My pulse ticked slightly faster. Then we don't proceed, I replied. There, a line drawn, clean, firm, the way it should have been from the beginning. For a second I thought that would be the end of it, that he would hang up, that this would dissolve into something I could file away as a complicated, inappropriate first session, but then, be ready at 7 tonight. My breath stilled. That's not how this works, I said immediately. You're right, Diego replied calmly. A pause, then lower. It's not how your world works. Something cold slipped down my spine. But you stepped into mine the moment you opened that door last night. My heart was beating faster now, not from fear, not entirely. You don't get to control when I see you, I said. Another soft exhale, closer this time. You picked up the phone, he said. You stayed on the line. A beat. And you're still listening, I swallowed, because again, he wasn't wrong. I'll send a car, Diego added. No, I said quickly, that won't be necessary. It wasn't a suggestion. The quiet authority in his voice wrapped around the words like steel under velvet. My fingers tightened around the phone. 7 o'clock, he repeated, and then the line went dead. I stayed there for a long moment, staring at my phone. The kitchen felt different now, smaller, like the walls had shifted inward while I wasn't paying attention. Slowly, I set the phone down on the counter. My coffee had gone cold, untouched. 7 o'clock. The words echoed in my mind, steady and uninvited. I should cancel. That would be the logical decision, the responsible one, the safe one. And yet, I didn't move, didn't reach for my phone, didn't type out a message. Instead, I stood there in the quiet of my apartment, already knowing something I wasn't quite ready to admit out loud. I was going to go. By the time the clock edged closer to evening, the quiet certainty I had clung to all morning had begun to unravel. I told myself I was in control, that this was still a professional decision, that I was choosing to continue the session under my own terms. But the truth sat somewhere deeper, quieter, harder to ignore. I had spent the entire day preparing, not just mentally, but carefully, deliberately, as if I were stepping into something far more significant than a routine appointment. My wardrobe had changed 3 times before I settled on something simple but composed, a reflection of the balance I was trying to maintain between authority and restraint. Even as I moved through my apartment, checking the time more often than necessary, I was aware of the steady undercurrent of anticipation building beneath my calm exterior. When the soft vibration of my phone finally broke the silence, I didn't need to look at the screen to know why. The message was brief, precise, exactly like him. "The car is outside." I stared at the words for a moment longer than necessary, my pulse quickening in quiet response, before setting the phone down and reaching for my bag. This was a decision, I reminded myself, a controlled step forward, nothing more. The evening air was cool against my skin as I stepped outside, the fading light casting a soft golden glow across the street. And there it was waiting, a sleek black car, polished to perfection, its presence as commanding as the man who had sent it. The driver stepped out the moment he saw me, opening the rear door with a respectful nod, but saying nothing. That silence felt intentional. Everything about this felt intentional. I slid into the back seat, the interior cool and immaculate, carrying a faint scent of leather and something darker I couldn't quite place. The door closed softly behind me, sealing me into the space, and within seconds, the car began to move. The city passed by in a blur of lights and motion, but I barely noticed it. My thoughts were elsewhere, already ahead of me, already back inside that mansion, back in that room. I told myself this time would be different, structured, controlled, professional. But even as I repeated the words in my mind, they felt thinner now, less convincing than they had that morning. The closer we got, the more I became aware of a quiet shift within me. Not fear, not exactly, but something sharper, more electric. Anticipation. By the time the gates of the estate came into view, illuminated under the deepening evening sky, my pulse had steadied into something calm but alert, like my body had already accepted what my mind was still trying to rationalize. The gates opened without hesitation, the car gliding through as if expected, as if I had always been meant to return. The mansion rose ahead, just as imposing as it had been the night before, its glass walls glowing with warm golden light that felt almost inviting, almost deceptive. The car came to a smooth stop at the entrance, and for a moment, I didn't move. I simply sat there, staring at the doors, aware that once I stepped out, there would be no pretending this was just another session. The driver opened the door, breaking the stillness, and I stepped out slowly, my heels meeting the polished ground with quiet certainty. The air felt different here, heavier, charged with something unspoken. I adjusted my posture instinctively, grounding myself in the role I was supposed to play, even as something deeper stirred beneath the surface. Then the doors opened, not by chance, not by coincidence, but as if he had been waiting for that exact moment. And there he was, Diego Navarro stood at the entrance, composed, still, dressed in dark precision, his presence filling the space without effort. His eyes found mine immediately, holding them with a quiet intensity that made everything else fade into the background. For a second, neither of us spoke. The distance between us felt deliberate, like a line neither of us had crossed yet. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, a faint shift touched his expression, not quite a smile, not quite something softer, but enough to change the air between us. "Right on time," he said calmly. My fingers tightened slightly around my bag, but my voice when it came was steady. "I don't like being late." His gaze lingered for a moment longer, as if weighing that response, before he stepped aside, giving me space to enter. Good, he said quietly. Because tonight, his voice lowered just enough to pull me in without moving any closer. We continue. I walked past him into the mansion, aware of his presence behind me, not touching, not close enough to break the boundary, but near enough that I could feel it. And as the doors closed softly behind us, sealing the night in place, I realized something with a clarity that settled deep in my chest. I hadn't just come back to finish a session. I had walked willingly into something I no longer fully controlled. And this time, I wasn't sure I wanted to. The hallway stretched ahead of me, quiet and impossibly polished. The soft echo of my heels, the only sound breaking the silence as I walked deeper into the mansion. The warm lighting from the chandeliers above cast a golden glow across the marble floors, reflecting faintly with each step. But beneath that elegance, there was something else, something subtle that hadn't been there the first time I arrived. Awareness. Not just mine, his. I could feel it behind me without needing to turn. The steady presence of Diego, walking a measured distance at my back, unhurried, controlled, as though he had all the time in the world and knew I would not leave this time. I kept my gaze forward, focusing on the structure of the space, the symmetry of the walls, the carefully placed artwork that lined the corridor, grounding myself in observation the way I had been trained to do. It was easier to study the environment than to acknowledge the tension threading through the air between us. "You're quieter tonight," his voice came from behind me, low and even, carrying effortlessly through the space. I didn't slow my pace. "I'm focused," I replied. "That's what you're here for." A brief silence followed, weighted, deliberate. "Is that what this is?" he asked. "Focus." I didn't answer, not because I didn't have one, but because I wasn't ready to give it. We reached the base of the staircase, and I paused only briefly, my fingers brushing the railing before I continued walking past it. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. I already knew where those stairs led. "We're not going up there," I said calmly. My voice didn't waver. Behind me, his footsteps stopped. The shift was immediate, subtle but unmistakable, like the air itself had paused to listen. "No," he said. I turned then, meeting his gaze fully for the first time since entering the house. "No," I repeated. "If this session is going to continue, it will be done properly." One of his brows lifted slightly, not in surprise, but in interest. "Define properly." I held his gaze, steady, grounded in the role I refused to lose again. "We sit down," I said. "We talk, we establish boundaries, and we keep this in a space that allows that." His eyes searched mine, slow, deliberate, as if testing the weight of every word I had just spoken. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, without breaking eye contact, he took a step closer, not enough to invade my space, but enough to shift the balance again. "You walked into that room yesterday," he said quietly. "Not by accident." My pulse remained steady. "And I walked out," I replied. That landed. I saw it in the slight change in his expression, brief but real. A pause stretched between us, filled with something neither of us rushed to name. Then I turned away from him, my decision already made, and continued down the hallway toward the far end of the mansion. I didn't need directions this time. I had noticed the door the night before, set apart from the rest, quieter, less theatrical, more intentional. The kind of room built for conversations instead of control. I reached it before he did, my hand resting on the handle for a second before I pushed it open and stepped inside. The difference was immediate. No crimson glow, no heavy atmosphere pressing against my senses. Just a clean, structured space. Neutral tones, a wide desk, 2 chairs positioned across from each other with careful symmetry, order, clarity, control. I stepped further into the room, setting my bag down with quiet precision before turning to face the door, just as Diego entered behind me. He didn't speak right away. He simply stood there, watching, taking in the scene the same way I had taken in his red room, slowly, thoroughly. "You came prepared," he said at last. I met his gaze without hesitation. "I always am." A faint shift touched his expression, something that almost resembled approval, but didn't quite settle there. He moved further into the room, his presence filling the space differently here, less dominant but no less powerful, controlled in a different way. "You're changing the rules," he said. "No," I replied calmly, taking my seat. "I'm restoring them." The words settled between us, firm and deliberate. For a moment, he didn't move. Then slowly he stepped forward and took the seat across from me. The distance between us now was measured, intentional, safe, or at least it was supposed to be. I folded my hands lightly in my lap, my posture composed, my voice steady when I spoke again. "Now," I said, meeting his eyes with quiet authority, "we begin the session properly." But even as the words left my lips, I felt it. That same underlying tension, quieter now, controlled. But still there, because no matter how structured the room was, nothing about Diego Navarro was ever truly neutral. The room settled into a quiet that felt almost deceptive, the kind that suggested order while something far less predictable moved just beneath the surface. I held his gaze for a moment longer after my last words, letting the structure of the space anchor me, the symmetry, the distance, the simple fact that we were seated across from each other like this was supposed to be. This was how it worked. This was where I had control. "Let's start with something simple," I said, my tone measured, professional. "Why did you call me this morning instead of waiting for the scheduled session?" Diego didn't answer immediately. He leaned back slightly in his chair, one arm resting along the armrest, his posture relaxed in a way that felt intentional rather than casual. His eyes stayed on me, steady, observant, as if he was far more interested in my question than in answering it. "You want honesty," he said at last. "That's the point," I replied. A faint shift touched his expression, almost thoughtful. "Because I knew you would come back," he said. The answer landed with a quiet weight, simple but layered in a way that made it difficult to dismiss. I didn't react outwardly. "Confidence isn't the same as certainty," I said. "No," he agreed. "But you gave me both." My fingers remained still in my lap, but I felt the subtle tightening in my chest. He was watching for it. Of course he was. "You're deflecting," I said calmly. "That wasn't the question." "It was the answer," he replied just as evenly. A brief silence followed. Not empty, but charged, like two opposing forces testing the boundaries of the same space. I let it sit for a moment before shifting direction. "Fine," I said. "Then let's move forward." I leaned back slightly, mirroring his posture just enough to balance the dynamic without losing ground. "Tell me about the room," I continued. "Not what it looks like, what it does." That caught his attention. I saw it in the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way his focus sharpened. This wasn't a surface question, and he knew it. "It removes distractions," he said after a moment. "That's one way to describe it," I replied. "Try again." Another pause, this one longer, more deliberate. "It removes control," he said finally. The words settled between us, heavier this time, more honest. I nodded once. "Yours or theirs?" His gaze didn't leave mine. "That depends on who walks in." The answer was precise, too precise. I felt it again, that subtle shift in the air. The quiet push and pull that had nothing to do with the room we were sitting in and everything to do with the one upstairs. "And when I walked in?" I asked. This time he didn't hesitate. "You tried to keep yours," he said. "Tried," I repeated. A faint, almost imperceptible exhale left him. Something just short of amusement. "You don't like losing control, doctor." The observation was accurate, uncomfortably so, but I didn't let it show. "Neither do you," I replied. That stopped him, not dramatically, just enough. Just long enough to confirm that I had found something real. The silence that followed felt different now, less like a standoff and more like recognition. Two people who understood the same language, even if they were using it for different reasons. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms against the desk, grounding the moment back into something structured. "Last night," I said, my voice steady, "you broke a boundary." His expression didn't change. "And so did you." The response was immediate, controlled. I held his gaze. "This isn't about me." "It is," he said quietly. The simplicity of it made it harder to argue. "You walked into a space designed to take control away," he continued. "You stayed. You didn't leave when you realized what it was." My pulse shifted, just slightly. "And yet I'm sitting here now," I replied, "in a space I chose." Another pause. Then slowly he leaned forward too, closing just a fraction of the distance between us. Not enough to break the structure, just enough to challenge it. "For now," he said. The words were quiet, certain. I felt the weight of them settle, not as a threat, but as a possibility. And that was worse. I straightened slightly, reclaiming the distance he had just tried to narrow. "If this continues," I said, my tone firm again, "we establish clear rules." His gaze sharpened, interest flickering again beneath the surface. "Go on." "No physical contact," I said. "Sessions happen here, or in a neutral environment, and anything discussed stays within the boundaries of this space." I let the words sit, deliberate, structured, immovable. For a moment, he didn't respond. He simply watched me, as if weighing not just the rules, but the intention behind them. Then slowly, he nodded once. "You're building a system," he said. "I'm doing my job." A faint pause, then, "And if I don't follow your rules?" The question was calm, too calm. I met his gaze without hesitation. "Then there is no session." The answer came clean, final. This time, the silence stretched longer, heavier, like something had shifted beneath the surface again. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close enough to feel like one. "You're different here," he said. "I'm consistent," I replied. "No," he said quietly. "You're contained." The word lingered. Not an insult, not quite a compliment. Something in between, something that suggested he was already looking for the edges of it. I didn't respond to that. Instead, I picked up my pen, flipping open my notebook with a calm, practiced motion. "Let's continue," I said. "Tell me about the first time you felt the need to build that room." This time, the silence that followed wasn't a power play. It was something else entirely, slower, heavier, real. Diego's gaze shifted, not away but inward, like something had been pulled to the surface whether he intended it or not. And for the first time since I had met him, he didn't look in control of the moment. Not completely, which meant one thing. We were finally getting somewhere. The silence that followed my question stretched longer than any before it. But this time, it didn't feel like a power play. It felt heavier, like I had stepped onto something buried, something that hadn't been touched in a very long time. I didn't interrupt it, didn't rush him. That was the mistake most people made, filling silence because they were uncomfortable with it. I wasn't. Silence, when handled correctly, had a way of pulling the truth out on its own. Diego remained still across from me, but the stillness was different now, not controlled in the same effortless way as before. There was tension in it, subtle, contained, but there. His gaze shifted slightly, not away from me, but not entirely on me either, like he was looking through something instead of at it. It wasn't built all at once. he said finally. His voice quieter than before, stripped of some of its edge. I didn't move, didn't speak, just let him continue. It started as a room, he went on. Empty, useless. A faint pause. Then it became necessary. The word lingered. Necessary, not wanted, not desired, needed. I tilted my head slightly, studying him. Necessary for what? I asked. His eyes returned to mine slowly, and just like that, some of that familiar control slipped back into place. Not fully, but enough. For silence, he said. For control. My fingers tapped lightly once against the edge of my notebook before going still again. Control over what? Another pause. Shorter this time. Sharper. Everything that doesn't belong outside that room. The answer was careful, too careful. I leaned forward slightly, not pushing, but not letting him retreat either. That's not an explanation, I said calmly. That's avoidance. Something flickered in his expression. Brief, dangerous. Then without warning, he shifted. Not his words. His body. Diego stood. The movement was smooth, unhurried, but it changed the entire dynamic of the room instantly. The controlled distance we had established bent. Just slightly, under the weight of it, my eyes followed him, but I didn't stand. I wouldn't give that ground back so easily. He walked slowly, deliberately, around the side of the desk, his fingers brushing lightly against the surface as he moved. Not random, intentional, every step measured, every movement observed. You want details, he said, his voice lower now, closer, not in distance yet, but in presence. I watched him carefully. That's how this works. He stopped just short of where I was seated, not close enough to break the rule I had set, but close enough to make it feel thinner. Be careful what you ask for, doctor, he said quietly. There it was again, not a threat. A warning wrapped in something far more controlled. I didn't look away. Sit down, I said. His gaze held mine for a second longer, as if weighing whether or not to listen. Then slowly he did, but not immediately across from me this time, slightly closer, not enough to be inappropriate, just enough to be deliberate. My pulse shifted, just once, but I kept my expression steady. Start talking, I said. A faint exhale left him, something that almost sounded like restraint. Then his hand moved, resting loosely against his knee, fingers tapping once, slow, controlled, before going still again. There was a time, he began, when control wasn't optional. His gaze drifted, not to the room, but somewhere further back, somewhere I couldn't see. Where I grew up, he continued, silence meant you were safe. Noise meant something was about to happen. My chest tightened slightly, but I didn't interrupt. Doors didn't stay closed, he added. And privacy, a brief pause, didn't exist. The pieces started forming, not complete, but enough to shape something real. So you created a space where you could control both, I said. He looked back at me. I created a space where nothing happens, unless I allow it. The precision of that statement settled heavily between us. It explained the room, the rules, the atmosphere, everything. But it also explained something else, something more personal. And when someone walks into that space, I said slowly, they give that control to you. His eyes didn't leave mine. Yes. The word was quiet, certain. The air shifted again, that same underlying tension threading its way back into the space between us. Then almost absent-mindedly, his hand moved again, this time along the edge of the desk, fingers tracing the surface slowly, deliberately, like he was mapping the space between us without actually crossing it. My eyes followed the movement before I could stop myself. And he noticed. Of course he did. A subtle shift in his expression told me everything. He leaned back slightly, but not before letting his hand pause just a second longer than necessary. "You remember it," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. My gaze snapped back to his face. "This isn't about me," I said, sharper than before. "No," he agreed calmly. "But your body doesn't separate things as easily as your mind does." The words landed too close, too precise. I straightened slightly in my seat, forcing the structure back into place. "We're discussing your coping mechanisms," I said. "Stay on topic." A faint, almost invisible smile touched his lips, gone as quickly as it appeared. "I am," he said. "You just don't like where the topic leads." My grip tightened slightly around my pen. He leaned forward then, just enough to shift the balance again, his voice lowering, not louder, but closer in a way that had nothing to do with distance. "That room," he said, "works because people react before they think." A pause. His eyes held mine. "You did." My breath caught, barely noticeable, but enough. Enough for him. The silence that followed felt different now. Not just tension, recognition. The kind that made it harder to retreat behind professionalism. I closed my notebook slowly, deliberately, placing it on the desk in front of me. "Session over," I said. His brows lifted slightly. "Already?" "We'll continue next time," I replied, standing this time, reclaiming the movement before he could. "When the focus stays where it's supposed to be." For a moment, he didn't move, didn't argue. He just watched me, that same unreadable expression settling back into place. Then slowly, he stood as well. The space between us shifted again, charged but contained. 7 o'clock again?" he asked. I met his gaze, steady. "We'll see." A pause. Then I turned, walking toward the door without waiting for a response. But I felt it, that presence behind me, not following, not stopping me, just there, watching. And somehow, I knew this wasn't over, not even close. The night air felt different the moment I stepped out of the mansion, cooler, sharper, like it was trying to wake me up from something I hadn't fully realized I was inside of. I didn't stop walking immediately. I needed the movement, the quiet rhythm of my steps against the pavement, something steady to hold on to, while my thoughts tried to catch up with everything that had just happened. The gate closed behind me with a soft, final sound that echoed more than it should have. And for a moment, I stood there, staring ahead at nothing in particular. The session had ended. Cleanly, professionally, exactly the way I had insisted it should. And yet, it didn't feel finished. Not really. Because the moment I closed my eyes, I could still see it. Not the red room this time, but him. The way his voice had shifted when he spoke about control. The way his hand had moved along the desk. Slow, deliberate, like he knew exactly what it would do. I exhaled slowly, pressing my fingers lightly against my temple before pulling them away. This was exactly why boundaries existed, because without them, things blurred, and blurred lines led to mistakes. I started walking again, more focused this time, already building distance in my mind, compartmentalizing the session the way I had been trained to do. Patient, case, behavior patterns, trauma response, control mechanisms. Keep it clinical, keep it clear. By the time I reached my apartment, I had almost convinced myself it was working. Almost. The quiet inside greeted me the same way it had that morning, still, familiar, safe. I set my bag down, kicked off my shoes, and moved straight to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water without thinking. The coolness grounded me, pulling me further back into my own space, my own world, where everything made sense again. But just as I leaned against the counter, my phone buzzed. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. My eyes dropped to the screen. Unknown number. Again. A small, sharp awareness settled in my chest. Not surprise. Recognition. I let it ring once, twice. Then I picked it up. "Hello?" There was no greeting this time, no pause, just his voice. "You ended it early." I closed my eyes briefly, exhaling through my nose before responding. I ended it when it stopped being productive. A faint pause, then, "That's not why." My grip tightened slightly around the phone. "Then enlighten me," I said. His voice dropped, quieter now, more controlled, like he was choosing each word with intention. "You left because you felt it shifting." The words landed too precisely, too close. I pushed away from the counter, pacing slowly across the room. "You're projecting," I replied. "No," he said calmly. "I'm observing." Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with everything neither of us was saying directly. "You're very good at that," I said finally. A faint exhale came through the line, something just short of amusement. "And you're very good at pretending you're unaffected." My jaw tightened slightly. "I'm not your subject outside of session," I said. "Then don't answer the phone," he replied. The simplicity of it caught me off guard. I stopped pacing, because again, he wasn't wrong. A quiet tension settled in the space around me, the kind that made the room feel smaller without actually changing anything. "Why did you call?" I asked, bringing it back, pulling the conversation into something structured again. This time, the pause was different. Not calculated, not deliberate, shorter, more direct. "Because something changed tonight," he said. My chest tightened slightly. "What do you mean?" Another brief silence. Then, "You're not the only one who notices patterns." My grip on the phone stilled. "Be clear," I said. "Someone's watching you." The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. The impact immediate, the ripples spreading outward before I could stop them. My mind reacted first. Quick, logical, searching for explanation. "That's not something you say lightly," I replied, my tone sharper now. "I don't say anything lightly," he said. And I believed him. That was the problem. "What exactly are you implying?" I asked. His voice shifted again, lower, more controlled than before. "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you that you were followed when you left." A cold awareness slid down my spine, slow and deliberate. I turned slightly, my gaze moving instinctively toward the window, toward the dark stretch of street beyond it. Everything looked normal, quiet, still. "That's not possible," I said, even though my voice had lost some of its certainty. "You're not as unnoticed as you think you are," he replied. My pulse picked up, not panicked, but alert, heightened in a way that sharpened everything around me. "Who?" I asked. A pause, longer this time. He was choosing what to say, or what not to say. "That's what I'm figuring out," he said finally. I let out a slow breath, forcing my thoughts into order. "And you decided to call me instead of handling it?" I asked. "I am handling it," he said calmly. "This is part of it." The response was too smooth, too controlled, like there was more beneath it. "Why does this involve me?" I pressed. His answer came without hesitation this time. "Because you're already involved." The words settled heavily in the air. My mind raced through possibilities, scenarios, connections I hadn't considered before. "You think this is connected to you," I said slowly. "I don't think," he replied. "I know." Silence followed, thick, unavoidable. "Then say it clearly," I said. "You believe someone is watching me because of you?" "Yes." No hesitation, no doubt, just certainty. I turned fully toward the window now, my reflection faintly staring back at me in the glass. But beyond it, the darkness felt different. Not empty, just unseen. "And what exactly do you expect me to do with that information?" I asked. His voice softened slightly, but the control in it didn't fade. "Nothing," he said. A pause, then quieter. "That's the problem." My grip tightened again. "You don't get to decide what I do," I said. "No," he agreed. But you should be aware that walking away doesn't remove you from this. The words lingered, heavier than anything he had said before, because this wasn't about tension anymore, or control, or blurred boundaries. This was something else entirely, something real, something dangerous. I swallowed, forcing my voice to steady. If this is some kind of tactic, it's not, he cut in sharper this time. The shift in his tone was immediate, unmistakable. This wasn't the same controlled teasing. This was something closer to warning. I don't play games with things like this, he added. And again, I believed him. That was the part that unsettled me the most. The room felt smaller now, the silence heavier, like something unseen had stepped into it without asking. Lock your doors tonight, Diego said quietly, and don't open them for anyone you're not expecting. A chill ran down my spine, slow and deliberate. You're not coming here, I said immediately, a brief pause. Then, not unless you ask me to. The answer was calm, controlled, but it didn't ease the tension. Not even slightly. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself before speaking again. If you know something, you tell me, I said. You don't just drop warnings and disappear. I'll tell you when I have something concrete, he replied. Until then, be careful. The line went quiet for a second, then, 7 o'clock, he added. And just like that, the call ended. I stood there in the silence of my apartment, the phone still in my hand, my reflection staring back at me from the dark window. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Slowly, I stepped closer to the glass, my eyes scanning the street below, the parked cars, the empty sidewalk, the shadows stretching longer under the dim lights. Nothing moved, nothing shifted. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling. I wasn't alone anymore. The weekend arrived without structure, and that alone felt like a problem. No scheduled session, no carefully controlled environment, no measured questions or deliberate answers to hide behind. Just time, too much of it. I tried to fill it the way I normally would. Routine, order, small tasks that kept my mind occupied and my thoughts in place. Laundry, emails, a half-finished report I had no real urgency to complete, but none of it held. Every quiet moment stretched just a little too long, just enough for my thoughts to slip, circling back to the same place with an almost stubborn persistence. Him. The way his voice had shifted when he spoke about his past. The precision of his words. The control. And beneath all of that, the moments where it almost slipped. Almost. I told myself it was professional curiosity. That was the logical explanation. A complex patient, unresolved trauma, a mind that operated in patterns that demanded to be understood. That was all it was. Nothing more. Except the thought didn't sit as cleanly as it should have. Not when I found myself replaying the smallest details. The way his gaze lingered just a second too long. The deliberate movement of his hands. The way he seemed to notice everything, especially the things I didn't say out loud. By the time evening came, the quiet in my apartment felt heavier than it had any right to, which was how I ended up saying yes. You've been off all day, my friend said, studying me from across the small table as I picked at my drink. And don't tell me it's work because I know what that looks like. I exhaled lightly, leaning back in my chair. It's nothing, I said. Just a long week. She didn't look convinced. You're a terrible liar. You know that? A faint smile pulled at the corner of my mouth despite myself. I'm not lying. You're deflecting, she corrected easily. I huffed a quiet breath, shaking my head. It's just a client, I admitted finally. Her brows lifted instantly, interest sharpening. A client has you like this? I regretted saying it immediately. It's complicated, I said, reaching for my glass. They're always complicated, she replied. That's literally your job. I didn't answer that. Because this wasn't the same. and I didn't have the words to explain why. She watched me for another second before leaning forward slightly, her expression shifting into something more decisive. "You need a distraction," she said. "No." "Yes," she cut in. "You're coming out tonight." I hesitated. Everything in me leaned toward saying no, staying in, keeping control. But the thought of another quiet night alone with my own thoughts was somehow worse. "Fine," I said after a moment, "but just for a little while." Her grin was immediate. "That's all I need." The club was already alive by the time we arrived, music spilling out into the street in low, rhythmic pulses that you could feel before you even stepped inside. The lights hit first, shifting colors, dim and vibrant all at once, casting everything in a glow that made it harder to focus on any one detail. The air was thick with movement, voices blending into one continuous hum beneath the music. It was the exact opposite of everything I had surrounded myself with for the past few days. Chaotic, unstructured, anonymous, perfect for distraction. Or at least, it should have been. We found a spot near the bar. My friend already pulling me into conversation, laughter, something light and easy that I could follow without thinking too much. I let myself settle into it, just enough to loosen the tight edge that had been sitting under my skin all day. For a while, it worked, until it didn't. It started as a feeling, subtle, almost unnoticeable, the kind you could easily dismiss if you weren't paying attention. But my hand stilled slightly around my glass as my gaze shifted, scanning the space without turning my head too obviously. Nothing stood out immediately, just people, movement, shadows layered over shifting light. Normal, and yet, something wasn't sitting right. "You okay?" my friend asked, leaning closer to be heard over the music. I nodded once, too quickly. "Yeah," I said, "just a bit warm." She gave me a look but didn't push, turning back to the conversation as I took a slow breath, grounding myself again. This was exactly what he had said. Someone's watching you. The thought slipped in before I could stop it. I tightened my grip slightly on the glass, forcing myself to relax. This was a public space, crowded, loud. There was no reason to assume. My thoughts cut off abruptly. Not because I saw him, but because I felt it. That same awareness, sharper this time, focused. I turned slightly, just enough to let my gaze move across the room more deliberately now. And then, for the briefest second, it clicked. Not a clear view, not a full confirmation. Just a silhouette in the distance, partially obscured by the shifting lights and moving bodies. Still, unmoving, watching. My breath caught, barely noticeable, but enough to change something in the rhythm of my body. I blinked once, trying to refocus, to be sure. But the space shifted again. Someone stepped in front, the lights changed, and just like that, it was gone. My heart was beating faster now. Not panic, not yet, just heightened awareness, the kind that made everything feel just a little too sharp. "You sure you're okay?" my friend asked again, this time more serious. I forced a small nod, pulling my attention back to her. "Yeah," I said, "I just need some air." She hesitated but nodded. "I'll come with you." "No," I said quickly, then softened it. "I'll be fine. It's just outside." Another look. Then she sighed. "Don't take too long." I slipped through the crowd, the music dulling slightly with each step toward the exit. But the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it followed. The cool night air hit my skin the moment I stepped outside, sharp and grounding, but it didn't settle the tension sitting in my chest. I took a slow breath, scanning the street instinctively now, the dim lights, the parked cars, the shadows stretching along the pavement. Empty, quiet. Too quiet compared to the chaos inside. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the silence settle, letting my thoughts catch up. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe this was exactly what psychological pressure did. Made you see patterns where there weren't any, feel things that weren't real. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head at myself. And then, "You shouldn't be here." The voice came from behind me, low, familiar, controlled. My entire body stilled before I even turned. Because I already knew Diego. He stepped into view as I turned, his presence cutting through the dim light with that same quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself to be felt. His gaze moved over me once, quick, assessing, before settling back on my face. "This isn't your environment," he added calmly. My pulse hadn't settled yet, not even close. "What are you doing here?" I asked. His expression didn't change. "The better question," he said, his voice lowering slightly, "is why are you?" The air between us shifted again. Not like the session room, not controlled, not structured. This was something else entirely. Unpredictable and far more dangerous. Because this time, I wasn't on neutral ground. And neither was he. For a moment, neither of us moved. The noise from inside the club spilling faintly through the walls behind me, bass vibrating low and steady. But out here, everything felt sharper, quieter, focused entirely on him. "You didn't answer my question," I said, folding my arms lightly, more to ground myself than anything else. Diego's gaze didn't shift. "And you didn't listen to what I told you last night." A flicker of irritation rose in my chest. "You don't get to dictate where I go." "No," he said, calmly, "but I do get to point out when you're walking into something unprotected." The word lingered, settling somewhere deeper than I wanted it to. Before I could respond, the club door swung open behind me, laughter and voices spilling out as a group stumbled into the night, breaking the moment just enough to breathe again. "I'm fine," I said, sharper now. "You don't need to follow me around." "I'm not following you," Diego replied. "I was already here." Something about that made my pulse tick once. Before I could question it further, another voice cut through the air. "Well, damn. Didn't expect to see you out here alone." I turned to see a man stepping forward from the side of the entrance, his movements loose, unsteady, confidence stretched thin over something far less appealing, his eyes dragging over me in a way that immediately set something off. "I'm not alone," I said, my tone cool. He barely glanced at Diego before looking back at me, dismissive. "Yeah, I see that. Doesn't change the fact that you've been ignoring me all night." My brows pulled together slightly. "I don't even know you." He let out a short laugh, stepping closer anyway. "You don't have to. I've been watching you." The words hit wrong, too close to what had already been sitting in my mind. "I think you should step back," I said, my voice dropping. Instead, he stepped closer. "Relax," he said, reaching out slightly. "I'm just trying to talk." The moment his hand moved toward me, something in me snapped cleanly into place, and before I could think it through, I slapped him. The sound cracked sharply through the night, splitting the air in two. Everything went still for half a second, then everything exploded. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he snapped, his expression twisting instantly as he lunged forward. But he didn't reach me because Diego moved fast. No warning, no buildup, just motion as he stepped between us, catching the man's arm mid-lunge and shoving him back hard enough to send him stumbling. "Walk away," Diego said, his voice low and controlled, but carrying something far more dangerous beneath it. The man laughed, but there was no humor in it now. Or what? That was all it took. The next few seconds blurred into motion as the man swung first, sloppy but aggressive, and Diego dodged cleanly, his movements precise, calculated, like this was second nature, his fist connecting a second later, sharp and direct, sending the man staggering sideways. But it didn't end there because two more men appeared, drawn in by the chaos, by loyalty or stupidity, it didn't matter which. "Diego," I started, but he was already moving, one of them grabbing for him and Diego turning, striking fast, efficient, no wasted movement, no hesitation, while the second came toward me. My heart jumped, but I didn't freeze. I stepped back just enough, pushing hard against his chest. "Don't touch me," I snapped. But he grabbed my wrist anyway, and that was his mistake. I twisted sharply, pulling free just enough to throw him off balance before shoving him back, adrenaline cutting through everything as the chaos around us grew. Voices rising, people shouting, some recording, the situation spilling outward. "Enough!" Diego's voice cut through it, sharper now, as he moved back toward me, grabbing my arm, not rough but firm enough to pull me out of reach as one of the men recovered and lunged again. "We're leaving," he said. "I'm not running," I started. "Now," he cut in, and that tone left no room for argument. Then a shout rang out from the entrance, "Police!" and everything shifted instantly, panic replacing aggression as people scattered, the energy breaking into something uncontrolled. Diego didn't hesitate, his hand tightening around mine as he pulled me with him, moving quickly down the street, away from the club, away from the noise, away from the flashing lights already reflecting in the distance. My heart was racing, adrenaline still high, my breath uneven as I tried to keep up. "Diego," I started again. "Not here," he said, and we didn't stop moving. The city blurred past in streaks of light and shadow, until we reached a black car parked further down the street. And without slowing, he opened the door and guided me inside before moving around to the driver's side. The engine started almost immediately, smooth and controlled, like everything else about him, and within seconds we were pulling away from the scene, leaving the chaos behind. I stared ahead, my pulse still racing, my mind trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. The fight, the warning, the way he had stepped in without hesitation. The way he had taken control of the situation like it was second nature. The silence inside the car felt different, heavier, charged with everything neither of us had said yet. And I realized something as the city lights passed across the window beside me. I wasn't going home. I turned slightly, my voice steadier than I felt. "Where are we going?" Diego didn't look at me. "Somewhere safe," he said calmly. A pause, then quieter, more certain. "You're not going back to your apartment tonight." My breath caught slightly, my grip tightening against my lap. "Diego, you're already in this," he said, cutting me off, his tone leaving no room for argument. The words settled heavily between us as the car continued moving through the night, fast, controlled, deliberate, until the familiar outline of his mansion came into view. And this time, I didn't argue. The gates opened before the car even slowed, smooth and automatic, like the house itself already knew we were coming. And I didn't speak as we drove through, the silence sitting between us, not empty but heavy with everything that had just happened, the fight, the adrenaline still lingering, the echo of his warning now feeling far less distant. By the time the car came to a stop, my pulse had steadied, but not completely, not enough to pretend any of this was normal, because it wasn't. The engine cut, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then Diego stepped out, walking around the car without hesitation before opening my door, and I looked at him briefly, searching his expression for something, reassurance, explanation, anything that softened the edge of what the situation had become. But there was nothing uncertain there, just control, just decision. I stepped out. The night air was quieter here, heavier, the kind of silence that belonged to a place removed from everything else, safe maybe, or just controlled in a way that felt like safety. "Inside," he said, not harsh, not forceful, but final. I walked ahead this time, not waiting to be led, the large doors opening as we approached. The same polished floors, the same warm lighting, the same quiet power filling the space. But it didn't feel the same anymore, because I wasn't here as a therapist tonight. I was here because I had nowhere else to go. And that realization settled somewhere deeper than I expected. I moved further into the room, setting my bag down slowly before turning to face him. "You're going to explain," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Everything." Diego closed the door behind him, the sound quiet but definitive as it echoed through the space. And for a second, he didn't answer. He just looked at me, his gaze moving over me briefly as if confirming I was fine, before returning to my face. "You were followed," he said, direct, no build-up. "I figured that much," I replied. "By who?" A pause, deliberate but not long. "Someone who shouldn't know you exist," he said, and a chill slid down my spine. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now," he replied calmly. I shook my head slightly, frustration rising sharper now. "You expect me to just accept that? That I'm suddenly involved in something I don't understand because of you?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation, without apology, just truth, and somehow that hit harder than anything else. I let out a quiet breath, turning away from him for a moment, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the table as I tried to steady my thoughts, because this wasn't my world. It wasn't supposed to be. I dealt with controlled environments, with words, with measured responses, not with shadows and fights and being told I was being watched. And yet here I was. I turned back to him. "Then start helping me understand it." His gaze held mine for a moment before something shifted. Not dramatically, but enough to let something real slip through. "Where I come from," he began, his voice lower now, more grounded. "People don't separate their personal life from their enemies. If someone wants leverage, they don't come for me directly. They find something I won't ignore." My chest tightened slightly as the implication settled in. "You think that's me?" I said quietly. "I know it is," he replied, and silence followed, heavy and real, because there it was, the truth stripped down to its simplest form. I wasn't just involved. I was a target. I straightened slightly, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Then this ends. Whatever this is, the sessions, the contact, all of it. If I'm the risk, then I remove myself from the situation." The words felt right, logical, exactly what I should do, but Diego didn't react the way I expected. He stepped closer, slow, controlled, intentional. "No," he said, and the single word landed with quiet force. My brows pulled together. "You don't get to decide that." "I do, and it doesn't change anything," he replied. "If I'm not connected to you, you already are." He cut in, calm but firmer now. "You've been seen with me. You left here. You came back. You were followed tonight." Each word tightened the space around me just a little more. "This doesn't disappear because you walk away," he added. And I hated that he was right. I could feel it settling piece by piece, logic overriding denial. Walking away now wouldn't undo anything. It would just leave me exposed. I looked at him, really looked this time, searching for something underneath the control. "Then what happens now?" I asked. A pause. "You stay here tonight," he said. My breath stilled slightly. "And after that," I pressed. "We figure out who's watching you," he said. And the certainty in his voice should have been reassuring, but it wasn't, because it meant this was only the beginning. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders easing just slightly as I let the reality settle. I was in his world now, not on the edges, not observing, but inside it, and there was no clean way out. "Fine," I said finally, the word heavier than it should have been. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then quieter this time. "You can take the guest room," Diego said. A small breath left me. How generous. Something faint shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, but close. "I'm not completely unreasonable," he said. The tension didn't disappear. It changed, softer at the edges but still there, threading through the space between us. I moved first, picking up my bag again. "Show me," I said, and he didn't argue. just turned and led the way down the hallway, his pace steady, unhurried, like everything else he did. I followed, aware of the silence, the shift in everything that had brought me here, until we stopped in front of a door further down the corridor, away from the staircase, away from the part of the house I had already learned too much about. He opened it. The room inside was exactly what I expected: neutral, carefully arranged, safe, or at least designed to feel that way. I stepped inside, setting my bag down slowly before turning back toward him, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "Get some rest," Diego said, simple and controlled. I nodded once. "Good night." He didn't move immediately, and for a second something unspoken lingered again, something that had nothing to do with danger or threats. Something far more complicated. Then it was gone. "Good night, doctor," he said quietly, and the door closed behind him. Just like that, I was alone, but not the same kind of alone as before. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle, my mind replaying everything: the fight, the warning, the way he had stepped in without hesitation, the way he had taken control like it was instinct. Slowly, I walked toward the window, pulling the curtain back just slightly, darkness stretching beyond the glass. Still, quiet, unmoving, but this time I didn't trust it. I let the curtain fall back into place, turning away as I exhaled slowly, my thoughts quieter but heavier, because one thing was certain: whoever had been watching me hadn't stopped.